and welcome to this week's episode of the Tombstone Tourist. I'm back at Woodlawn Memorial Park here in Nashville, Tennessee, and after spending the last several episodes on the third floor of the Cross Mausoleum, I've moved back outside and going to be visiting the Garden of the Grand Tour. I dare say that this is probably the most visited garden in this entire cemetery. So, let's step right up, come on in, and visit the final resting place of the man we know as the Possum, the great George Jones. George Glenn Jones was born on September 12, 1931 in Saratoga, Texas. He grew up with his brother and 5 sisters in an area of Texas known as the Big Thicket. When he was 16 years old, George left home and went to Jasper, Texas, where he began performing on radio station KTXH. A short time later, George moved to KRIC Radio, where during one of the afternoon shows, he met his idol, Hank Williams. In 1950, George met and married his first wife, Dorothy Bonvillian, but their marriage was short-lived and the couple divorced a little over a year later. Soon after his divorce, George enlisted in the United States Marines and was stationed in San Jose, California, until his discharge in 1953. In 1954, George married Shirley Corley and started working at radio station KTRM near Beaumont, Texas. It was here that DJ Slim Watts took to calling him George Pickle Puss Possum Jones. The name stuck and was eventually shortened to the Possum. In 1955, George recorded his first hit, a song called Why Baby Why. Began appearing as a regular member on the Louisiana Hayride. In addition to the Hayride, George also played shows with Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash. In interviews later, George recalled that he was never that close to Elvis, but he and Johnny remained lifelong friends. A year later, 1956, George was invited to become a member of the Grand Ole Opry. Even as a member of the Grand Ole Opry, George continued to play the low-budget rural honky-tonks that were scattered throughout the South and Southwest. This forever endured George to his legion of fans who would stick by him through the good times and the bad. In 1959, George cut his first #1 hit, White Lightning, which was written by J.P. Richardson, who is better known as the Big Bopper. It was then that George began to have his well-documented problems with alcohol. It was obvious that he was under the influence of alcohol when he showed up for his recording session, and it took him 80 cuts to get it right. In 1962, George signed with United Artists, which produced one of his biggest hits, She Thinks I Still Care. As his success continued, so did his use of drugs and alcohol, which garnered him a reputation of somewhat of a hellraiser. As the years went by, George would go on drinking binges that would finally result in him being admitted to a rehab facility in 1967. In 1968, George met Tammy Wynette, who was also being booked by the same agency as George. As George put it, for him, it was love at first sight, and the two were married in 1969 and began performing together. As a duo, they enjoyed a number of hits, including We're Gonna Hold On and Golden Ring. As one of the most popular acts in country music, George and Tammy became known as Mr. and Mrs. Country Music. George and Tammy's marriage and personal drama was well documented by the media, and even though they continued to be country music's #1 draw, the couple divorced in 1976. After several years of sniping at one another in the press, George and Tammy seemed to put their differences aside and recorded an album together in the early 1990s. And they even toured together just before Tammy's death in 1998. George's continued abuse of drugs and alcohol really took its toll on his career, as he began canceling dates at first and later just not showing up at all, earning him the nickname No-Show Jones. But even George's tarnished reputation could not dim his popularity or his talent, as he recorded another #1 hit, He Stopped Loving Her Today. George not only remained popular with his fans, but also with his fellow country music stars. He was the subject of an HBO special entitled George Jones with a Little Help from His Friends. This special had him performing with the likes of Waylon Jennings, Elvis Costello, Tanya Tucker, and of course, Tammy Wynette. George continued to have success with songs like Wine-Colored Roses and Who's Gonna Fill Their Shoes. And in the 1990s, a new George Jones took to the stage to perform. He was sober and began playing dates that he had canceled in the past or just failed to show up for. He remained sober and dependable for the rest of his career. In early 2012, George began suffering some health issues, which caused him to be hospitalized. Then, on August 14, 2012, George announced a farewell tour, a 60-city tour that he called the Grand Tour, which would end with one final concert on November 22, 2013 at the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville. However, on April 6, 2013, George Jones would make his final performance at the Knoxville Civic Auditorium in Knoxville, Tennessee. A few days later, George was forced to cancel tour dates in Alabama and in Salem, Virginia due to illness. He was hospitalized on April 18, 2013, and after spending 6 days in the intensive care unit, George Jones passed away on April 26, 2013 at the age of 81. The man we know as the Possum leaves behind a legacy that few entertainers will ever reach. During his long career, he had a total of 13 #1 hits and was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1992. In 2012, George received the Grammy's Lifetime Achievement Award. And finally, I think the inscription on his grave monument says it best. George Glenn Jones was and is the king of broken hearts. He sang of life's hardships and struggles in a way that somehow lightened our own. His voice was effortless and unforgettable. He brought unsurpassed emotional eloquence to every song he sang. He was and he is the soul of country music. No one will ever fill his shoes. He is at rest, but his music is alive and ageless. He gifted it to all of us, to the joyful and the broken. Walk through this world with me, he sang, and we do. The Possum. Well, this is where I'm going to end this video. If you have a favorite memory of George Jones or any of the people that we visit in these videos, I hope you'll share them with us in the comments. If you haven't already done so, I hope you'll consider ringing that bell and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. And if you're so inclined, a thumbs up is always appreciated. Now, until next week, please remember, life is a wonderful journey. Be sure to take time and enjoy it. And I'll see you down the road. So long, everybody.